Hello, my name is Claude, and I received a living kidney transplant from my sister. That was almost 5 years ago. So my renal dysfunction started, it was very, very insidious, but about probably 20 years ago. At that time, the only symptom that I had was a gout, and I was treated for this, and there was not even any changes in my blood work at that time. But eventually, it was very insidious, but my condition started to deteriorate, and it took about 20 years. And then when I was closer, about a year and a half before my transplant, my nephrologist had said, okay, now you're doing well with your diet, but your exercise level has decreased, and the way that my kidney function was declining, I would probably require some renal therapy, such as dialysis or preemptive transplant, in about 12 to 18 months. So this is how we started to get on the journey of the potential living donation. So living without working kidneys meant that I had to alter my diet. I had to be very strict in regards to potassium intake, and also I could really feel a decline in my energy level to a point, and that the deterioration was progressive, but at the end it was very, very steep. And within a couple of weeks, I could no longer climb one flight of stairs. I had to stop in the middle as I was short of breath. And that is when I said, okay, now I had already stopped. I had to stop exercising a few months before. And at that point in time, I had reduced my working hours. And when I realized I cannot even climb one flight of stairs, this is when I had to stop working and proceed with some therapy that could really help me. Therefore, when I was at the end of the rope, I had to consider seriously therapy to replace my non-functional kidneys. And even as my condition had deteriorated over many years, I had time to think about the pros and cons of dialysis, a cadaveric donor, and preemptive donor from a living donor, which was also an option at that time. And therefore, as after discussion with all of my loved one, we came to the conclusion, with the medical expertise that was given to us, that living donation would be a great option, one, followed by dialysis, and eventually maybe a cadaveric donation. So I've never been on dialysis, because when my situation started to decline, I had the privilege to have a kidney offered, and we did all the tests, and I was able to bypass dialysis to go directly to the transplant. My close friends and my family, everybody knew that I had a renal condition, and that eventually it would get worse. However, I'm a very determined person and very independent, and I had always promised myself that I will not let the disease define who I am, and will not let this define how people look at me. So I was very discreet, not that I was hiding this, absolutely not, but I was very discreet, so I just wanted to be considered for who I am as an entire person, not just as a disease. Therefore, at the last Thanksgiving dinner that we had, I asked my son if how he really went through this process, and his answer was very significant to me, because he said that he knew about this, but he never really realized the whole impact it could have had. And I was happy, because that was my goal, to go through this without minimizing basically the impact on others, and going for the best solution as when they were presented to me. So when my nephrologist says that my best alternative would be a living donation, I have to admit that I was puzzled. I was not excited, I was not worried about at that time about the technicality of a transplant. What worried me is that, okay, how can you ask for a kidney? You cannot ask for this. It's not something that I felt comfortable asking, and that's why I said, okay. I was like, it was like sweet and sour for me. But then I started reflecting on this, and I said, I'm not gonna ask. I can't. But I will make people aware that my condition is deteriorating and there are options, and living donation is one of the options. So that is the route that I had decided to take. It was indeed very difficult to talk directly about living donation. With my close friends as well as with my family, I could have approached the topic, but as mentioned, I could not ask for a kidney. But I had decided that, okay, if I had to market myself, my condition. So I asked my mother to make sure that every members of the family were aware that where I was at and that I would need either dialysis or transplant. I did the same with my friends, and all of my family members were aware. We even considered going broadly, but I didn't feel comfortable either to go and ask strangers. I didn't use the social media or anything like this. I use social media to raise awareness surrounding, generally speaking, the renal insufficiency and possibilities that are out there. But I didn't do this attached to my name because, again, I thought it would be too selfish. So I just went with raising awareness with families and friends, and I was hoping that somebody might show some interest, and indeed it did happen. Yeah, there were moments where I was scared, and after all, a transplant is an operation, and for the purpose of disclosing some aspect of my life, I'm an anesthesiologist. I do live in the operating room, so I know what the risk of an operation do involve, particularly for those who have renal failure. So that's something that I was scared. And when we talked about living donation, it was that I was scared I will never find a donor. I will have to go on dialysis, and the other thing is that it's very hard for anybody to decide to give an organ, and then there's always life do happen, and sometimes we might not be compatible, or a health issue may happen, and the transplant may never materialize. So that's what scared me during the whole process, that at one point we would find something and it would not go through. And but that's something, you see, I'm assuming everybody goes through, and this is part of the game. So just went with the flow and did it successfully. As the question was never really brought forward specifically by asking, would you give me a kidney? So my sister, who eventually became my donor, never had to let me think about this, because everything was done without a real ask. But once we were at a family gathering, and at the end of the dinner, when everybody started to leave the table, my sister and her husband stayed at the table with me, and this is when she broke the news to me. She says that her and her husband had been thinking about this, discussing, and the decision had been made that she was going to be my donor. So obviously that was a very emotional dinner at the end of it, and I remember vividly when my daughter, who was at that time a teenager, was a teenager, or maybe 16, 17 years old, she froze, and she says, "It's so generous." And this is what we felt like. We felt a joy that was still pretty kept, as I didn't want to raise my hope too much. But it was a very, it was not like, it was joy, but it's more than this. It was just I think the best of human nature rising to the surface, that giving this gift of life, literally gift of life, that would allow me to have a practically normal life thereafter was unbelievable. So we really, I would not use the word celebrate because it's not a typical celebration, but we just, our heart was so warm and we could just look at each other without having to say anything. That was a very beautiful moment. So when my sister broke the news, either her or myself didn't have many questions in regards to how it would affect the donor because we had done our due diligence. So the technical aspect, the research was done, the questions were answered, but for me it was more an apprehension of what if something doesn't go well for her, and that would have been the worst. And so it was not questions, it was really the feeling attached to the whole journey and the procedure itself. Throughout the journey, from the decision of proceeding to all the investigation until we complete the investigation, throughout that journey I tried to keep my hope in check because each time my sister would have a test, I was afraid that something could happen that we might not be able to proceed with the transplant. And in reality, we had a few bumps along the road, but continuously my sister would say, "Don't worry, we'll continue the test, and we'll see what can happen." And twice she had to redo tests because there were queries, and she was always hopeful it's going to work out. I was a bit more concerned that it may not get to fruition. However, she was always there with the positive attitude that she has always been, and she's even more positive than she was in the past. And this is how we went through this. So she was basically more the engine pulling on and showing all the beauty of it and the hope, and I was more restrained because if that doesn't work, now I knew I would have to go on dialysis. So we've learned together about the procedure, and the most comforting aspect of this journey for both my sister and I was that the pre-op preparation was so well done, so comprehensive, that we felt, okay, this is not an unknown field anymore. We felt familiar with this, and we were ready to proceed with the operations. So on the day of the procedure, we both arrived at the hospital at the same time, and I was not very talkative because I was very preoccupied by the well-being of my sister. And I was even praying, saying that, God, if something has to happen, please make sure it will happen to me, not her. And that was my big concern. She was totally optimistic, no issue, but I was very concerned by her well-being, as she was so generous and altruistic that I don't know how I could have lived if something would have happened to her. But everything went very well for both of us. In total, the surgeries lasted about 2 hours each, and my sister, my donor, was discharged from hospital after 5 days, and I did encounter a few complications. Therefore, I stayed in hospital for 10 days. I am currently almost 5 years post-kidney transplant, and how many days did it take for me to get back to normal is an excellent question that there's no simple answer. Because what is normal? I've been living for 20 years with a chronic disease. So I don't know what is to be fully healthy, actually. I can't remember this. I am obviously healthier now than I have ever been. So there's no doubt about this. But after the surgery, I can tell you that the next day, I started to feel like the fog was lifting because my brain was clearer. I could remember the first name of the nurses that would care for me, which I had a hard time to do before. And then progressively, you go back to basic activities. After 2 weeks, I felt that I was fairly independent, could not lift any heavy object, but otherwise I could, do everything that I had to do, simple task. And I remember that after 2 months I could not, but after 4 months I went back to the gym. And 6 months after my surgery, I was climbing a mountain, and again with some limitation that I had imposed on myself, but I felt pretty good actually being able to achieve this after 6 months. So I have never been on dialysis as I went for preemptive donation, but a colleague of mine was diabetic, was on long-term dialysis before he received a transplant. And his definition was that on dialysis you survive. After transplant you can live again. So it's been almost 5 years since I received my transplant, and honestly I feel better than ever. And I'm really living the dream. And this is even an understatement. The reason being that after such a huge ordeal, after chronic disease, and you know how life can be difficult, and now you have your health again. So everything that I do has a different dimension. I look at life from a different angle. And I'm extremely happy, I'm lucky, and I can really enjoy life to its fullest. So, having a living donation, so having this relationship, donor and recipient, is extremely powerful. There's no word to describe this. It's almost like a symbiotic relationship. And I would do anything, literally anything, for my sister, and she would do the same for me. It's more than siblings. It's more than anything. My favorite memory about this entire journey is my sister's attitude. She says that she's the one who benefited the most from giving me a kidney. And we always laugh about this because I'm the one who gained everything, because I had no life before, and now I'm back with a full life. But for her, it's the opposite. She says she had this altruistic gesture, this gift of life, is so meaningful for her as well that it gave her an empowerment that she had never felt before. I am extremely thankful to my sisters because of her outstanding generosity. I can live a normal life. So the past 5 years, each time I do something really that pleases me, or a nice contribution to society or to others, each time I say it's because of her. Without that donation, I could not do that. I could not enjoy my own life, and I could not contribute to others. So that's what I'm thankful about, and she deserved the entire credit for this. My message for patients in the renal failure who are waiting for a transplant is that don't stop dreaming. Keep your hope and do what matters the most for you at the present time. There is a hero out there for you. Just be kind and generous to others, and life will reciprocate to you.